All right, welcome back. It's been a little while. Today we're going to talk about Section 7.8 of the AP World Modern Curriculum, mass atrocities after 1900. Certainly not the most enjoyable section of the AP World Curriculum. And in fact, it might very well be the worst. So what do you need to know? We're going to take out of this the rise of extremist groups. This is the language of the College Board again from their CED. The rise of extremist groups in power will lead to attempted destructions of specific populations. And we're going to see this in many different instances around the world. The killing of the Jews by the Nazis during the Holocaust in World War II, the Armenian Genocide in the Ottoman Empire during World War I, the Cambodian Genocide in the late 1970s, the Rwandan genocide of the Tutsi population in the 1990s, and the Ukrainian famines in the 1930s. So let's give a closer look to each of these, and we'll note some similarities and differences as we go along. We start with the Holocaust. Now, this is the only one that's specifically mentioned by word within the curriculum. So this is the only one that you could have a specific question about on the AP exam. The others are going to be excellent to use for outside evidence on DBQs, LEQs, SAQs. So the Holocaust. This is the Nazi Party's goal of creating a racially pure German state that would lead to its policies of removal and ultimately extermination of the Jews and the Slavs of Europe. The Holocaust is the term that is used for that systematic murder of over 6 million European Jews during the course of World War II. Now, this process began as early as 1935 with laws in Germany like the Nuremberg laws that stripped the Jewish population of their citizenship and rights to hold certain jobs. And as the war began and progressed, Germany would then begin to target Jewish populations throughout Europe, first through the executions in occupied nations, and then through the use of poison gases in extermination camps, as the Nazis would, in fact, industrialize the murder during the Second World War. Now we move to the First World War, and we have another example of a mass atrocity during a wartime situation, and that's going to be the Armenian Genocide. During the First World War, the Ottoman Empire would target Christian Armenians that they suspected of being disloyal towards the Ottoman Empire, and rather they put their loyalty, they believed, towards the Christian Russian Empire. The Ottomans would force deportations and sending of the Armenian populations to camps in present-day Syria and Iraq, but along the way, executions, starvation, disease, exposure to the elements would lead to the deaths of upwards of 1 to 1.5 million Armenians. Fast forward to the 1970s, and it's another example of an extremist group rising to power and targeting populations. And this is going to be the Khmer Rouge. It's a radical communist group that takes control of Cambodia in the 1970s. Now, this is going to rise out of the chaos of the Vietnam War, but it's after the Vietnam War, where the United States had done some bombing campaigns in Cambodia along the border regions in Cambodia. And the Khmer Rouge used this as a propaganda tool to grow their influence. Once they came to power in 1975, they would begin to target Cambodians that they believed were tainted by Western ideas. This included intellectuals, as identified often by the glasses that they wore, whether they be doctors or lawyers or educators. Religious believers, because the Khmer Rouge as a communist regime were deeply anti-religious. Millions would be forced into re-education camps, and when all was said and done, upwards of 1.5 million Cambodians would be killed during this reign of the Khmer Rouge. In the 1990s, we have ethnic animosities in Rwanda that date back to the Belgian colonial rule, where the Belgians would offer preferential treatment to a minority population of Tutsis over the majority population of Hutu. Remember, this is a legacy of imperialism, where European imperial powers took no consideration for the ethnic groups that they pushed together to live in colonial in the colonial era. And the Belgians, to their part, in this region of their colony, favored the Tutsis over the majority Hutu population, which was another strategy that was often employed by imperial rulers. Following independence, the majority Hutus would rule the newly democratic government, while the Tutsis fled that discrimination that they would now find, and some formed a rebel army to strike against this new Hutu government. The genocide would begin in 1994, following the death of the Hutu president after his plane was shot out of the sky by those rebel forces. Over the next 3 months, nearly 1 million Tutsis would be massacred in Rwanda by a Hutu majority, while the international community was very slow and ineffective in their response. This sheer speed of the violence in Rwanda, a few months with nearly 1 million dead, makes the Rwandan genocide stand as the most violent of these 20th century genocides, at least in terms of the time that it took place in. And then finally, one unique example the College Board gives us is the Ukrainian, what is known as the Holodomor. This is the mass starvation of Ukrainian peasants during 1932 and 33. This is caused by a famine that is largely the fault of Soviet economic policies of collectivization of agriculture and the Soviet government confiscating the food production to be exported towards industrial centers. This would lead to a widespread famine that had already been existing elsewhere in the Soviet Union, but exacerbated in the Ukraine as these Stalinist policies made the devastation there even worse, and led to the deaths of upwards of 4 million Ukrainians. So what do we want to take from this? The 20th century sees unprecedented levels of death and destruction through conflicts like World War I and World War II. But that was not all. We've got the rise of extremist groups that contribute to even greater death tolls, as often specific populations were targeted for violence. And while the Holocaust is the most well-known genocide of the 20th century to us Americans, other atrocities of Armenians and Tutsi Rwandans and Cambodians and Ukrainians will contribute to this incredible death toll that we see throughout the 20th century. We'll see you next time with Unit 8.